everyone, I'm Father Casey, the pastor of the Epiphany of Our Lord Church, and I welcome you once again to our YouTube channel, The Fourth Magi. This week in the Gospel comes on the heels of last week's Gospel, where Peter proclaimed that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God. So this week in the Gospel, Jesus decides to let his disciples in on a little secret. And that is that he, as the Messiah, is going to suffer at the hands of the scribes, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees in Jerusalem. Well, apparently that was news to Peter, because although he got it right last week, well, now he gets in Jesus' face and he says, you know, none of that will happen to you, that you should suffer. I mean, I'm summarizing this, of course. But he says to Jesus, like, you should not suffer. Basically because he understands him to be the Messiah, the Christ, the Son of God. Well, why should you suffer? That's not the plan. That's not what I had in my brain, is what Peter says to Jesus. And Jesus says something very strong. He says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. Now, he's not referring to the red guy with horns and a cape and a pitchfork, okay? He's not referring to that person at all. The word Satan means adversary, okay? So anybody who is your adversary is a Satan. So he's saying to Peter, who he just said, I'm going to build my church on you, and then he calls him Satan. He's saying, you know what? You are an adversary to me. You know, you got it right, but now you're screwing it up again. You know, sometimes students do that. You know, they get the answer right, but they don't show the work, or whatever. But Peter is screwing it up again. He says, you are thinking as human beings do, not as God does. And can you really blame Peter? And Peter is thinking about Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the one that they waited for, the ones the prophets have written about, that Moses talked about in his writings, and that he's going to be suffering, he's going to die. What? What? No. So you really can't blame Peter. So Peter might have screwed it up in Jesus' eyes. But you and I really wouldn't have been any different, because why would the Son of God suffer? Why would the Anointed One, the Messiah, suffer? And so the question is suffering redemptive? Is there something good about suffering? Now, if you've ever watched a loved one die, you're going to be cursing me out right now and yelling at this TV screen, saying, who do I think I am to say that there's actually redemption in suffering? And there's a whole slew of literature and philosophy books that revolve around the idea that there should be a world that was created without suffering. That if there was a true, loving, merciful God, he would have created a world in which there wasn't any suffering. And you're probably shaking your head. Yep, nodding your head. I agree. But that's not the world that was created. Because the world that we live in, if you live in reality, is a world that is filled with suffering. A world filled with hatred and racism, and war and rape, and terrible things that happen to good people every day, and things that happen to children even. But God did not create a world in which there isn't any suffering. Why is that? It's because he's a cruel God, he's a merciless God, that he has fun and he just likes to watch people suffer? No. There is suffering and pain and sorrow in this world because God created beings like us that have the capacity to love. But in order to give a being the capacity to love, you have to also give that being the same capacity to not love. To give them the choice to love. Because if you were to force someone to love someone else, that wouldn't be love. That would be duress. That would be wrong. That would be bad. Wouldn't be love. You know, that's why shotgun weddings aren't real. There's no real love there. The person said I do because they were forced to under pain of a shotgun. So, but in order to love another person, you have to freely choose to love. But a person can also freely choose to not love. They can choose to hate. They can choose to inflict pain and suffering on another person, on the world. And we experience that every day because of love. Now, you're going to have to sit with this and think about this for a while, but it really is quite beautiful that God would give us the freedom to love, but also by doing that, give us the freedom to not love. And to know that His own Son is going to suffer at the hands of His other creation because He's misunderstood, because those beings are not capable of love anymore. Their hearts are hardened, and His Son is going to be subjected to that. And that's what blows Peter's mind. And so the idea that Jesus could suffer for us also gives us the theology that we can suffer for someone else. Meaning that when you and I are suffering, this is hard to do, that we can offer that suffering up to God as a prayer and say, like for instance, when I was going through my cancer treatments, I thought of this little girl named Bella who was also going through cancer. And I would say, as I went through my suffering during my cancer, please God, let my suffering that I'm going through alleviate the sufferings of this little girl, Bella. Did that happen? I don't know. But I could take that suffering that I was going through, and instead of bitching and moaning and crying about it, I turned it into a prayer. Does that make me a saint? No. I'm a priest who understands the theology of suffering. And I believe in my faith that my suffering was not wasted. That I was able to offer it up as a sacrifice, as a prayer. And God willing, He heard my prayer, and I believe He did. And hopefully He eased the suffering of that little girl who was going through cancer herself. So this week we should ponder a couple of things. One, do we understand the gift that we've been given by God, by being given the capacity to love? And the flip side of that, that there's evil in the world, there's pain and suffering because of love, and those who choose not to love. And that the suffering that we endure is not wasted, because we'd like to eliminate it, all of it. But there is redemption in suffering, and that it can be offered up as a prayer. Food for thought. I hope you have a blessed week.